Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Katz, and I am the Executive Director of CoPIRG, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group, and here today to talk to you about robocalls. I'm very honored to be joined by the Colorado Attorney General, Phil Weiser, who will talk a little bit about some of the work that they have been leading on when it comes to robocalls. But let me first just say we'll be happy to take questions at the end here after we talk a little bit about why we're talking about robocalls today. So first and foremost, let me just start by saying not all robocalls are bad. Just this week, I got a robocall from my kid's school telling me about an important change that was made in an upcoming meeting. But it doesn't take a large survey to know that lots of people are being inundated by illegal robocalls that are attempting to steal personal information from us or trick us into buying something that we don't really want. I asked a couple of friends and family, have you gotten any unwanted robocalls recently? And there was a lot of head nodding. The one that I heard the most was calls about car warranties for a car that the person doesn't even own. We also, I think too many of us have had the experience of getting a call, and it looks like it's coming from a local number. It looks like it's coming from potentially a neighbor or somebody who needs to get in touch with you. And when you pick it up, it turns out it's somebody overseas who's trying to sell you something you never really wanted in the first place. We've also heard stories of people spoofing and acting like they're from the IRS or from the Amazon security department. So, we're sick of illegal robocalls that can steal our personal information and can attempt to sell us things that we never wanted to begin with. According to the FCC, robocalls are hugely costly. I mean, they cost nearly $10 billion a year in fraud. They can cost us as consumers $3 billion a year just in wasted time dealing with them. This is a really big issue and something that I think we've seen for at least a decade. What's frustrating, though, is the modern day robocall has technically been illegal since 2009. So even though it's been a decade since it's been technically illegal, we still are inundated by them or have been. And so what's going on there? And I think part of it is of enforcement for so long was trying to go after the actual companies that were responsible for making these calls. But as spoofing technology has gotten more sophisticated, it is really a game of whack-a-mole. And so I think the last few years there's been a major shift to start to work with the phone companies to try to stop those calls before they come in, or at least verify them and ensure that consumers have the right information about who is this that's on the other end of my phone, and is it somebody that I can trust to be calling me? So that is what we're excited to talk about today, is that in June, a new law went into place that's requiring all phone companies to put into place anti-robocalling technology. And just next week, on Tuesday, the 28th, is the deadline by which phone companies can start blocking calls from phone companies that have not put in these anti-robocalling technologies. And so that's why today is a really important day. The CoPIRG Foundation, we dug in and looked at the data being submitted by phone companies to the FCC. And unfortunately, we're seeing that we're not at 100% of the phone companies have implemented the state-of-the-art, the standard anti-robocalling technology. There are thousands of phone companies out there, and of the nearly 3,000 that have reported to the FCC, only 17% as of September 3rd had said they'd fully implemented the robocalling technologies. When you look at the largest companies, there's 49 large companies we looked at that really provide service to 1 million or more people each. We saw 16 had fully implemented and 18 had partially implemented. So we weren't at that 100% mark as we're heading into September 28th, and we want to make sure we get there. That said, a lot of progress has been made. Just since June, a major anti-robocall filtering company, Umail, has said that they've seen a 29% drop in robocalls from June to August. And I personally have noticed it. I seem to be getting less. I've also started to notice that my phone is saying scam likely on some calls that are coming in. So I'm starting to see a difference in my life, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will be for everybody. A lot of it depends on these individual phone companies. So I think we're seeing a lot of progress, but there's more to be done, especially as we look to next Tuesday and that deadline by which, if a phone company isn't starting to implement these technologies, their calls could be blocked. So on that note, I wanted to welcome again Colorado's Attorney General, who's been doing so much work on this, to talk a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing to lead on this issue and to help bring phone companies together and make sure that we're stopping these unwanted, and illegal robocalls. So thank you very much, Attorney General Phil Weiser, for joining, and welcome you to say a few words.
I appreciate it. Dan, you gave a great explanation, which this is a scourge. And I've talked to people, particularly older Coloradans, who are afraid to answer their phones because they are constantly barraged. And that means they may not talk to their grandkids or others who they love and care about because they don't think it's safe to answer the phone. When I came into office in 2019, this was hitting a almost crisis point for so many people. We were in our office seeing, and we continue to see, the #1 complaint we get of every complaint about issues that consumers care about, it's these robocalls. So what we did is we worked on a set of anti-robocall principles with state AGs and with the telecom companies and said something's got to change. Now, I've got a background in telecom, so this for me was sort of playing on my home field. And what we made sure to do is to identify and block spam calls and authenticate legitimate calls. Since that set of principles went into effect, we've identified 52 billion of these spoof numbers or spam calls. 32 billion have been blocked. But I think an important point that Danny made is that some companies haven't implemented the key technology that we drove into law. Shaken and stir. I often joke it's a James Bond fan who's come up with it. And they have been working to create this authentication system, but we need all companies complying with it. We've been pushing on that issue. And then other providers are going to basically be in a position to say, we're not letting calls through if we essentially see them as these harassing spam phone calls, like the ones we get from the IRS, which is a painful experience for many people who are afraid because they don't know that this is illegitimate. And a lot of people have given up personal information and have identity theft because these calls have continued to happen. So we're all in on this issue. We really appreciate partners like CoPIRG, law enforcement, the Federal Trade Commission. We also need consumers to do their part. Here's what I mean. Constant vigilance is the watchword. Every single call you get could be a scam. Unfortunately, even my basic advice, if you don't recognize the number, don't pick up. But as Danny said, you may have someone spoofing it so it looks like a legitimate number, local hospital, but it's not. So be nervous. If someone asks you for personal information over the phone, hang up. Don't go there. If you haven't already on your mobile phone, particularly gotten the critical services that Danny talked about that enable these spam calls to go automatically to voicemail, you should. If it's a legitimate call, don't worry about letting it go to voicemail. Legitimate folks will leave voicemails. Scam artists will not. So we've all got to do our part. This is a critical issue for consumers. We hear that literally every day. We've been working hard on this issue, implementing the law, pushing for the law that Danny talked about. We're going to keep working on it. Danny, thanks for all your leadership on this.
Great. Thank you very much. And let me just put into the chat here a link to the report or analysis that we did of the data from the FCC and some of the examples that we found. We have an appendix in that report that highlights some of the features that some phone companies are putting forward and to reduce the spoofing and some of these illegal robocalls. The last thing, just as a reminder, I mean, the Attorney General talked about some of these tips, from CoPIRG's perspective, there's a lot of things we need to do. One thing I've heard people say that they don't believe the do not call registry that we have federally works, and so they don't bother putting their number on there. We're encouraging people to go ahead and do that because it does help build a case later. I mean, if you are getting a call from somebody and you are on that do not call registry, it does help build a case that they are breaking the law if they're not supposed to be calling you. So we encourage people to do that. We also encourage people, if you do wind up picking up a call and it happens to be a robocall, don't do anything to indicate you picked up the phone. Hang up right away. Don't try to push buttons to get you off any list. That's usually the way that they then know, oh, there's a real person on the other end of this number, and they continue to call you. And then lastly, just make sure you report robocalls that you think are unwarranted or illegal. Report them to your phone companies now that phone companies are stepping up and putting in a lot more technologies so that they can help improve the technologies they have. report them to the FCC through the donotcall.gov website, and report them to the Colorado Attorney General's office at Stop Fraud Colorado. So make sure that you are reporting that as well. So those are some of our consumer tips too. And I can put into the chat as well some of the, I put into the chat the report for folks to be able to take a look at. On that note, we have a couple of reporters here. If anyone has any questions, please just go ahead and put it into the Q&A or the chat. Otherwise, we can follow up afterwards. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds here to put any questions into the chat or the Q&A. Otherwise, we can wrap up and get folks whatever information they need. Let's see if there's any questions. All right, I don't see any. So thank you so much, Attorney General Weiser, for hopping on today and for being a leader on this issue in so many different ways, and continue to look forward to making sure that we're getting you the information you need so that you can be protecting consumers across the state.
Pleasure. Great partnership, Danny. Keep up the great work.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.